Hey you guys, the Doc is Hope here and welcome back to my channel. So today we're working on a sew along. This is just a simple quick top. This is Butterick 6848. I'm going to be sewing up view C with the 3/4 length sleeve. Your suggested fabrics here are your medium weight knits such as cotton knits, jersey knits, interlock, and novelty knits. And we're not going to need any notions here. So let's get ready to sew. So I picked this really fun stripe in red and navy blue, which I love. So for this pattern, we're gonna need piece 2, which is your back. Cut 1 on fold. We're going to need piece 6, which is your front. Cut 1 on fold. We're going to need piece 5, which is your sleeve. Cut 2. Lastly, we're going to need piece 7, which is our neckband, and we're just cutting 1 on single layer of fabric. So we don't have a whole lot of pieces. This should be a very quick and easy sew along. So go ahead and cut everything out, get everything marked off with your markings, and then let's get ready to put this top together. Okay, you guys, so go ahead and grab piece 2, which is your back, and piece 6, which is your front. We're gonna stitch these together right sides facing at the shoulder seams and the side seams. Okay, so I'm going to turn my front onto my back, and we're gonna go ahead and pin right sides together all the way down the side and all the way down both shoulders. So we're going to go ahead and match our fabric at the underarm, also at the bottom. That way we can make sure everything's even with no gaps in between. Matching all of our notches as well. I'm gonna try to keep my stripes matched also. But if you're not sewing with stripes, you don't really have to worry about that. We're just pinning all the way down the side seam. So once you have one side pinned, go ahead and pin your other side the same way. And then we're also going to pin both of our shoulders. So go ahead and match the corner, match the other corner. And then match that notch that you have on both of your shoulders. Pin that together as well. Okay, so once you have the other shoulder pinned, we're gonna stitch from the outside in, so this way, and then we're gonna stitch our side seam from the bottom to the top. So let's go to the sewing machine. Okay, so we're at the sewing machine. I have my fabric underneath my presser foot. My seam allowance is going to be 5/8 of an inch, and I'm going to go ahead and go to a zigzag stitch, drop down my needle, and we're going to make sure that we are back stitching at the beginning and the end. Removing our pins as we go. Make sure everything's nice and smooth underneath here. Alright you guys, so I'm going to stitch my shoulder seam again from the outside in, and then I'm going to stitch the other side the exact same way. So again at 5/8 of an inch, make sure to back stitch. So once you have stitched your other side the same way, meet me back at the sewing table. Okay guys, so once you have both sides and both shoulders stitched, it should look like this. They want us to do a double stitch. So what you're gonna do, if you have a serger, just go to your serger and serge close to the first row of stitches. If you don't, just go back to your machine and move out about 1/4 of an inch into the seam allowance. So for this, it would be to the right, and just do another row of stitching like the first one. So I'm going to use my serger, and then once you do that, meet me back here and we'll move on to the next step. Okay guys, so once you have that, your seams, double seams in, we're going to go ahead and go to the ironing board and just press these seams. If you did not serge and you zigzag stitch, just trim close to the outside stitching, and then we're still going to press the seams just to make sure everything's nice and melded in with the threads. And then once you do that, we'll go ahead and go on to the next step. Okay, so our next step, we're going to attach our neckband to our top, but first we're going to do a little bit of work on the neckband. So go ahead and grab piece 7 here. I'm going to set my top aside. Again, make sure you have marked your notches and also marked where your center front is. That's just going to make it a lot easier for us to line everything up when we're pinning it together. So for those of y'all who have been here for a while, you know I like to put a little pin on the right side of my fabric, especially when it looks the same, so that I know it's the front, or the right side rather. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna stitch right sides together, the short ends of our neckband together. So just like this. But first we're gonna pin it. And again, I'm trying to keep my stripes matching, so gotta keep that in mind. So we're gonna go to the sewing machine and we're just gonna stitch right across at 5/8 of an inch, and then we'll come back and attach our neckband to our top. All right, you guys, so let's go ahead and stitch the neckband 5/8 of an inch. I'm still using a zigzag. Make sure to back stitch at the beginning and the end. Let's go ahead and go back to the sewing table and attach our neckband to our top. Okay, so before we attach our neckband, go ahead and go to your ironing board and press open your neckband seams, or, well, still press your seam, or you can serge So either press open if you're not serging, or press open and then serge your seams, and then come back and we will attach it to the top. Okay, so now that that is finished off, we are going to turn and fold in half with the wrong sides together. So your seam should be on the inside. So we want the right sides looking at us. Move our pin now that we have a seam there, so we know which side is which. And they don't tell us to do this in the step, but I like to go ahead and baste. Well, actually it does say hand or machine baste. So yeah, we're gonna baste. So make sure your seams are turned the right way, same way. And you wanna match your seam as well. So I'm just gonna put a little pin there. And then we're just gonna pin, again with wrong sides together, all the way around this neckband. And once we have it pinned, we're gonna go to our sewing machine and we're gonna put a basting stitch in. Actually, you know, to make it lay nice and flat, I think I'm gonna actually press it first, and then we're gonna go and baste the raw edges together. But for now, let's just get everything pinned, matching our notches. So everything's pinned. So I want you to go to the ironing board, press the fold, there we go, press the fold, and then we're gonna go to the sewing machine. Okay, you guys, so here we are at the sewing machine. You see how when you press your band, it's nice and flat now? So we're gonna do a basting stitch. So I'm gonna go to a straight stitch and turn my stitch length to its highest setting or longest setting, which on my machine is 4. And I'm gonna start at my back seam and baste using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So no back stitching here. Actually, I think I'm gonna use a 1/2 inch seam allowance for my basting. So no back stitching, we're just gonna keep going all the way around, removing your pins as you go, using 1/2 inch seam allowance. Back where we started. Clip your threads. And so your band should look like this. And let's go ahead and go back over to the sewing table. Okay, so once we have that stitched together, it's gonna make it very easy for us to put our neckband onto the top, because instead of 2 separate edges, you just have one now, since we basted that together. So go ahead and grab your top, and we're gonna turn our top right side out. So I'm just gonna put that out like so. And starting with the back, we're gonna pin our neckband. So go ahead and find the back of your top and also line it up with the seam, the back seam here of your band. Go. So you want that part that way so that you can pin it all together. So again, we're matching the seam back seam with the middle of the back. And then we're also going to match the notches that we made for our shoulders, the notch that we made for the front, and again, actually it looks like there's a few notches here at the front. So let me repin that. There we go. Okay, just gonna pin in between like that. And very important, when we actually stitch, we're gonna use a zigzag stitch, and then we're gonna remove that basting stitch because we want our neck band to stretch when we wear the top. We don't want it to be like you can't fit your head through the opening. So keep that in mind as well, that we are going to remove that basting stitch. So once you have your band, your neck band pin on, it should look like this. And when we go to the sewing machine, we're actually gonna kind of stretch that neck band as we go around so that it fits where these little gaps are on our top. So using 5/8 of an inch, we're gonna start at our back seam, and we're gonna stitch all the way around, again using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance until we get back to that back seam. So let's go to the sewing machine. Okay, so here we are at the sewing machine. I have my stitch set to a zigzag stitch. I have my needle down right in my back seam, and again using 5/8 of an inch and slightly stretching if needed the neck band as we go. We're just going to stitch all the way around, making sure to back stitch at the beginning and the end. Stitch. So your neckband is now stitched on. Let's go ahead and go back to the sewing table. Okay, so once we have our neckband stitched on, they want us again to stitch 1/4 of an inch from the first stitch or serge. But before I do that, I'm gonna go ahead and remove that basting stitch, the straight stitch that we did initially, just to free up and open up that fabric so that it's not confined by a straight stitch. So go ahead and remove that basting stitch, you guys. Not the zigzag, but just that first straight stitch we did. And then go ahead and stitch your second row of stitching or serge, and then meet me back here at the sewing table. Okay, so once we have our neckband serged or double stitched, you want to clip any extra threads that you have hanging out, and then we're going to go to the ironing board and we're going to press the seam towards the top. So not up but down towards the top. So you'll have to turn your top inside out like this. And then use your iron to press your seams down. Once you do that, come back and we'll move on. Okay, so once you have your band or your seam pressed towards your top, next thing that we're gonna do to make sure that our seam allowance stays down flat is we're gonna go to our sewing machine and we're gonna stitch a top stitch on the outside all around the neck at 1/8 of an inch from the seam. So we're not stitching on the neckband, we're stitching on the top through all layers, catching in that seam on the underside so that that stays nice and flat when we're wearing our top. So let's go ahead and go over to the sewing machine and top stitch our neckband. So here we are at the sewing machine. I'm gonna go back down to a straight stitch and I'm gonna set my stitch length to a 3 just because when I'm top stitching, I kinda don't want just a really tight stitch. So I'm going to line my presser foot. I think I'm gonna start again at the back seam. And I'm gonna line my presser foot up with the seam. I'm gonna drop down my needle. And that might be more of 1/4 of an inch. I don't know, they want it to be 1/8. If you wanna be exact, you can mark it off and then stitch it, but I'm just gonna kind of eyeball it. So I'm just gonna kind of use my fingers to gently spread apart the seam. I'm not pulling it, I'm just kind of flattening it. And I'm gonna stitch and back stitch at the beginning and the end. And then I'm just gonna use my presser foot as a guide to stitch all the way around that neckband. And you should be able to feel with your fingers the ridge of that seam underneath. So once we have done that, let's go ahead back over and press this. Just press everything to make sure it's nice and flat. Clip any excess threads, and then let's go back over to the sewing table. Okay, so at this point, I like to try my top or dress onto the mannequin and just see like how it's looking. And I think it's looking really good so far. So this is the front. I love how it's a nice long top. And then this is the back so far. I think my stripes are lined up pretty well. And then of course you can see the top stitching on our neckband here. So next we're gonna go ahead and put our sleeves on to the top. Okay, so we're back, you guys. We're gonna go ahead and start working on our sleeves now. So all we have left to do with this shirt or top are the sleeves and then the hem, the bottom hem. So go ahead and grab piece 5, which is your sleeve. Okay, so again, I'm gonna put a pin on the right side of my fabric in the seam allowance, just so that I remember which side is the right side when I take these apart, because they look the same. And what we're gonna do now is go to our sewing machine and we're gonna put in a basting stitch right along the sleeve cap here. So from one notch all the way to the other notch, using 5/8 of an inch, let's go to the machine, and at our longest stitch length, we're gonna put in a basting stitch at 5/8 of an inch. And then we're gonna do another row of stitching about 1/4 of an inch from that. and that's gonna allow us to gather our sleeve so that we can set it into our top. So let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, so again, I have my stitch on a straight stitch. I'm gonna raise it to the longest stitch, which for me is a 4. And we're gonna go ahead and baste from one notch to the other at 5/8 of an inch. No back stitching. And again, no back stitching. We're gonna leave a tail. So leave yourself some thread so that we can gather that sleeve as we need to. And then you wanna make sure that those tails are out of the way when you do your second row of stitching. So I'm gonna go right next to the first row. Pretty much I'm gonna line up my presser foot with the first row and do a second row of stitching just like we just did with no back stitch. All right, again, leave yourself some thread, some tail, and so you should have 2 rows that look like this on your sleeve cap. So go ahead and do your second sleeve the same way and then meet me back at the sewing table. Okay, you guys, so once you have your sleeve basted rather, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna sew the seam of our sleeve. So flip your sleeve onto the right side, and what you're gonna do, make sure your threads are out of the way. We're going to fold right sides together, and we're gonna pin from the top of the sleeve to the bottom of the sleeve. And then once you have that pinned, we're gonna go ahead and go over to our sewing machine. Let's see, there's one gap right there. We're gonna go ahead and go over to our sewing machine, and using 5/8 of an inch, we're gonna stitch that seam from the bottom to the top on both of these sleeves, and then we'll be ready to put in our sleeve hem. So let's go ahead and stitch that now. Once you have it stitched, go ahead and stitch again 1/4 of an inch away, or serge your seam, and then press that out. And then once you do that, meet me back here at the sewing table. Okay, so here we are. Again, make sure you move all of your basting stitches out of the way so that they don't get caught up in your stitching. I'm putting my machine to a zigzag stitch, 5/8 of an inch, and we're gonna go ahead and stitch and back stitch. So again, if you have a serger, go ahead and serge close to that first stitching row. If not, what you're going to do is move over 1/4 of an inch from that first stitching this way in the seam allowance and do your second row of stitching. So go ahead and do that, press your seam, and then meet me back at the sewing table. Okay, you guys, so once we have our sleeves sewn and pressed, the seams, they should look like this. The next thing we're gonna do is turn up and stitch our hem in place. Okay, so we're gonna be turning up 1¼ inch on the bottom of the sleeve. So the easiest way to do this, in my opinion, is I'm gonna go to the machine and I'm gonna do a basting stitch 1/4 inch from the raw edge. So just 1/4 inch from here. And that's gonna be what I'm going to use to turn under my 1/4 inch once we turn in the full hem of the sleeve. So this will make a lot more sense in a second, but for now, just go ahead and go to your machine and again, use a straight basting stitch and stitch 1/4 inch from the raw edge all the way around both sleeves, and then meet me back here. Okay, so now that we got the basting stitch in, it should look like this. Hopefully you can see that. So we're gonna turn up that full 1¼ inch on the sleeve. So I have my little seam gauge here just to make sure that I am at 1¼ all the way around. And we are good here. Okay, so I'm gonna press that cuff there, and then I'm going to turn under, so 1¼ here, and then I'm gonna turn under right along that basting thread, and that's gonna be our 1/4 inch to hide that raw edge and make it nice and neat. So go ahead and do that, both of those steps, and press that in place. And then once we do that, we're gonna baste close to the upper fold, so here, and then we're gonna turn our sleeve right side out, and we're gonna stitch using a twin needle right along our basting to finish our hem in place. So go ahead and go to your ironing board and press your seam in place, and then we're gonna go ahead and baste. All right, you guys, so I have folded my hems and tucked in my 1/4 inch, and I've pressed it. I just put pins in just because I want to make sure everything stays in place. And so next thing we're gonna do is grab the needle and the thread in a really off color yellow, and we're gonna baste close to this top fold again. And that's just gonna make sure that when we stitch, when we top stitch this hem, it's gonna stay in place from the right side. And I'm gonna start at a seam, at the under seam here. And I'm just gonna stitch through all layers close to that fold at the top. And that's just gonna keep everything nice and secure and in place. Boom, we're back. I'm just gonna leave that thread the way it is. I'm gonna do the same thing on the other sleeve, and then once you have that done, we're gonna flip our sleeve onto the right side, and we're gonna stitch using a twin needle right along our basting stitch. So go ahead and baste your other sleeve hem in place. Okay, so for the interest of time and kind of simplifying things, before I actually stitch, and I'm removing my pins once I basted that because it's gonna be held in place now. Before I actually stitch that seam of my sleeve down, I'm gonna turn my sleeves out, and I'm actually gonna go ahead and set them into the top. That way I don't have to go and switch from a twin needle to a regular needle back to a twin needle. I can just do the sleeve hem and the bottom hem all at once. I like to simplify things when I can. So let's see, so we're gonna turn our top right side out. So this is the wrong side of the top. And we're gonna slip one of our sleeves, matching the underarm seam into the top. And I just happened to get the right match because we have one notch here and one notch here. And then in the back, you got 2 notches here and 2 notches here. Sometimes that doesn't happen and I have to switch out the sleeve. So again, with the sleeve on the right side and the top on the wrong side, you're dropping the sleeve down into the armhole and you're matching the underarm seam of the sleeve with the underarm seam of the top. And we're gonna pin right there at that seam because we want that to match for sure. The next thing we're gonna do is pin at our notch. So there, and we're gonna go to the back of the sleeve, making sure our threads are out of the way. And we're gonna pin at that double notch as well. So there we go. You should have a little notch or a marking at the top where your top of your sleeve cap is. That's going to line up with the shoulder seam. So go ahead and pin that where your shoulder seam is. And now we know exactly how much we need to gather our sleeve cap in order to fit it into our armhole or arm side. So go ahead and grab your little threads and gently pull. We don't want any wrinkles and stuff, but gently pull. I'm gonna actually pin a little bit more of this just to get a better idea. You can kind of pin all the way up to that gathering thread. So again, just gather just a little bit, just enough where your sleeve and your sleeve cap and your arm side are matching. And then we're gonna go ahead and pin that as well, like so. And then on the inside, just use your finger to kind of spread everything out. Make sure there's no lumps and bumps. Turn your sleeve around the other way. And we're gonna do the same thing, so. This sleeve is ready to go. It's ready to be sewn in. We're using a double stitch seam again. So I'm gonna stitch once around 5/8 of an inch, and then I'm gonna use my serger to go again and clean up my raw edges. Go ahead and pin your other sleeve in to your arm's side the same way, and then meet me at the sewing machine and we will stitch in our sleeves. Okay, you guys, so I'm back at the machine. I'm going to a zigzag stitch. And let's go ahead and set in these sleeves, honey. This is your chance to make sure everything is right before you make this first pass of stitches. So again, check for lumps and bumps. If you have any, go ahead and work that out before you stitch. I'm gonna start, this is gonna be a 5/8 of an inch stitch, and I'm starting at the, let's see where I am. Starting at the underarm seam, making sure everything is nice and flat. We are stitching, back stitching at the beginning and the end here. I'm dropping down my needle, and let's go. And now is the time. The first time was the time, but now is really the time. Turn your sleeve out and look at your work. So how is your sleeve looking? Are there bumps and lumps and wrinkles and all those things? Which when I first started sewing, there were all those things. And then I started just taking that time before I do my second row of stitches to say like, okay, how is it looking? How is it looking? Do I want to go out with this shirt, this top? And so I think we did pretty good here. So since I have checked that and it looks good, I'm gonna go ahead and use my serger to serge close to the first row of stitches. If you want to use your machine to do your second row, do that. Go ahead and press that seam, and then we're gonna move on to our final step, which is stitching our sleeve hem in place and stitching our bottom hem in place using a twin needle, and then we will be done with this top. All right, you guys, let's finish this top. So we already have our sleeves basted for the hem. We're actually going to go ahead and baste our bottom hem as well now that we have the sleeves in. So like I said, we can just do one quick step at the sewing machine with the twin needle and top stitch both of these hems at the same time. So in order to do this bottom hem, it's going to be very similar or actually identical to the sleeve hem. So we're gonna go to our sewing machine, we're gonna do a basting stitch 1/4 of an inch from the raw edge. So right along here, all the way around, and then we're gonna fold up 1/4, 1 1/4 inches on the bottom of our top, and then we're gonna fold that raw edge under at the basting stitch, just like we did with the sleeve. We're gonna baste along that top fold, and then we're gonna go to the sewing machine and twin needle top stitch both the bottom hem and the sleeve hem. So let's go ahead and do our basting stitch, and then we'll meet at the sewing machine to top stitch both hems. Okay, you guys, so here we are, last step. Turn your top to the right side because we are now top stitching. I have removed all of my needles because I have basted my bottom hem, as you can see here. So I no longer need pins, and I have my twin needle loaded here. This is a twin stretch needle. And if you don't know how to use a twin needle, I have a video for that. Don't you worry, I'm gonna link it here for you. Go watch that real quick and then follow along with me. So I am going to stitch. I'm not gonna stitch directly on top of this basting stitch because that's gonna be kind of hard to remove. I'm just gonna put my sleeve over my little arm here on my sewing machine. And again, we're on the top of the fabric, right side of the fabric. I have my sewing machine set to a straight stitch because it's gonna do its zigzag thing even with this twin needle. So I'm gonna just drop down that needle, and it's actually gonna be on both sides of the basting, so that could actually work in our favor. So let's go ahead and back stitch at the beginning and the end. And you're gonna find that you have a zigzag on the back and 2 straight rows of stitching on the front. So try to keep your left needle kind of right next to that basting so that we don't get off of the underneath hem. And you can feel that with your finger as well, so keep an eye on that. Okay, so we're just gonna stitch all the way around. Make sure if you need to go slow, but do not come off of your seam. I can feel it here underneath, and I'm just gonna keep that, keep my left needle right at the edge of that seam. And that can get a little thick with that seam under there, but don't worry. Okay, so we have our first, as you can see, that 2 rows of nice top stitching. I love finishing off knits with a top stitch because to me it's just so clean and so pretty, and this is like how the professionals and the clothing companies do it. If you flip over a knit, you'll be like, oh, okay, that's a twin needle finish. So I love it. And then again, if you turn it on the inside, you can see the zigzag that it does on its own. So I love that. So now that we have that done, we can pull out our basting thread, and make sure you don't skip this step, because if you do, your sleeves are going to be super tight on your arm, on your wrist, and we don't want that. We want just a nice twin needle finish with a nice stretch. So that's how your sleeve is going to look. Go ahead and stitch your other sleeve the same way, top stitching, and then go ahead and stitch your bottom hem as well. And then once you've done that, meet me back at the sewing table and we will be done with this top. Congratulations. All right, you guys, well, once you have finished your hems and pressed your top, you're done. We're done. So here's my finished top. I love it with the stripes. I haven't even tried it on yet, but I think it's gonna fit really well. Of course, I'm gonna try it on for you and take some photos, but we have made it, you guys. Congratulations. You have yourselves a cute top for spring, for fall, and depending on where you live, even for summer. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. I will see you next time. Be blessed and happy sewing.